Nicholas Negroponte is the founder and chairman of One Laptop Per Child, and why this makes sense to kind of airdrop him in right now. He has a flight to catch, but also one of the things we talked about last night at dinner was the fact that he has airdropped tablets into different places in Africa to, I know, to see if children can learn, and so you're airdropped now into this.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm the culprit, but it's running a little bit behind. I've brought with me a brand new speech recognition remote wireless slide controller in the form of Rodrigo Arboleda, who will advance the slides. I have 15 minutes, and I'm going to set a timer, so I will not violate my time, and I hope everybody else sets timers. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to set some background, I'm going to tell you about the experiment, and then I'm going to tell you what I think it means. Many of you know me. I've been to these things before. I'm the guy that usually throws a laptop up in the air and lets it bounce on the floor. If you want to know more about laptops, Rodrigo does that, and he is not catching a flight. And then there's one other person whom I think is here. Matt Keller, are you here? Matt, well, at any rate, if Matt shows up, he can tell you a little bit about the experiment. By way of background, I've been doing this all my life. I've been involved with the use of computers in education in developing countries going back to 1982 and even before then, but I just didn't keep slides. And this is in Senegal. It's in Senegal in a part of sort of outside of Dakar, and it was way ahead of its time, but we learned something from that. We learned that these kids, even though they didn't speak English or French actually, played those keyboards like pianos. They weren't any different than the kids that I knew in the suburbs and that we had been working with in New York and Boston and other places. And then, go ahead one. In 2001, something else happened that affected my thinking, which is flashing forward quite a few years, and that was that by chance, my son was living in Cambodia in a village and had connected the school, and I sent some laptops, and it transformed the village. Transformed the village in the sense that it redefined the role of a child. Usually we think of children, especially in terms of Millennium Goals and giving it, we think of them as the objects, the recipients of some body of knowledge that's in our head that we're going to somehow get from our head into their heads. And there is, in some sense, no role that the child plays other than to learn by some measure that we typically artificially create. And so that changed here. These kids were the agents of change. They were teaching their parents how to read and write. They were running little businesses. They were setting up spreadsheets for the village. And this village had no electricity, no cell phone, no nothing at the time. Next slide. So I was compelled about 6 years ago, with the United Nations as a partner, to do something called One Laptop Per Child, and it was branded as the $100 laptop. This was the laptop, next slide, which transformed into an e-book as well, next slide, that I announced with Kofi Annan in Tunis. And it was rather important because, for me, I got to see the thirst that the world had. When the picture of that laptop rather came out, people understood, you may remember that little yellow crank on it, understood it was different. It was different. It wasn't just a diminutive office product. Next slide. So this is what we decided. Maybe you can just go through them. And we designed it. Many of you have seen it. And that slide, actually, let's stop for a second. That very important point, at least to me, again, I look at these images, where's that coming from? We don't use Windows on our laptop. This teacher had never, ever used a computer, had always taught in lines with the kids sitting perfectly in rows, and this is the way he teaches now. And I said, wow, that's very important. These kids run to school. The parents hang in the windows. Next. So I'm going to show a few more slides. That one always gets me because that girl's attention is extraordinary. Most kids go to first grade and their eyes light up. They're like sponges. And by third grade or fourth grade, they're already don't care. They want to get out of the classroom as fast as possible. They've kind of, sort of, in some sense, the passion has left. And so the next few slides are just sort of, as I say, background. And after doing this, and why don't you just go until you see the question that people asked was the following. Let's stop here for a second. What have you learned? And the answer is very simple. We have learned that the best teachers in the world are children. And that if you can harness the children themselves to help teach each other, you have a chance of hitting the Millennium Goal of universal primary education. This is normally not the approach, but we thought to ourselves, is it actually possible? Let's go forward to, and here, you're seeing some images of our tablet, and I don't want to use too much time, but I want to get to the first village. One more, another one. There we go. So if you want children to do more learning, and maybe even an awful lot of learning on their own, what is the question you ask? And the question you ask is, can a child learn to read on his or her own? Very simple question. Because if the answer is yes, then if the child can learn to read, the child can read to learn. Simple question. If the answer comes out yes, you have a lot of things that fall out consequently. Now, we know that you can take any child of 5 years old on this planet from any place on this planet and drop that child into, let's say, Paris, and that child will speak French in whether it's 10 months or 12 months or 8 months or a year and a half. We all know that's going to happen. Now, the reason that happens is that over roughly 1 million years, the brain has evolved so that we have what I'll call a talking brain. It happens naturally. You can take a kid and drop the kid in an environment. Now, reading is only 3,500 years old, and we do not have a reading brain. There is, in fact, no place that you can drop a kid and have that kid learn to read. So the question is, how little can you do? And so to answer the question, we're creating, and this is truly an experiment, and this is why I think it's so important. I'm not here to tell you the results because the first village started at the end of January, the second village in the middle of March, and the third village is starting in a few weeks. And these villages are carefully selected. They're in Ethiopia, and they're selected to have more than 10 but less than 20 children, just because if you have less than 10, they can deflate. You get a problem that's, that there isn't a child in the group who can sort of say, well, I have an idea. And if you get more than 20, it becomes a bit of a crowd, and there may be something that approximates a school. So we really want no school, no literate adults, no words in the village. There aren't bottles with words on the label. There are no street signs. The village doesn't have a name. Totally without words, without reading, and without writing. And what we did, we didn't airdrop them, though I've suggested that in writing. We didn't drop them in helicopters, but we came very close. Let's go to the next slide. And what we did is we dropped them off in the village, and when I say dropped off, they didn't come out of a helicopter, but the boxes were left at the edge of the village. Now, I thought the kids might open up the boxes and play with the boxes. That's what kids do. They didn't. They opened up the boxes, and within a couple of minutes, figured out there was something in there to turn on. None of them had seen a cell phone. Powered it up, and by the end of the week, the kids in the first village, 20 kids, were using 57 apps per child per day. Now, doesn't that blow you away? And by the end of the next week, they were racing each other. They were playing games in the village, running around in circles, racing each other to say the ABCs. Who could say them faster? Now, let's go through the rest of the slides. This shows you kind of this is the first village. Again, no human intervention, but once a week, a local Ethiopian goes in and takes the SIM card out of each tablet, 64 gigabyte SIM, and swaps an empty one in. And on the SIM card is a record, video, audio, pictures, data of what every single child has done. So there's lots of data pouring in. The SIM cards get taken to Addis Ababa. In Addis Ababa, they're moved to a hard disk. The hard disk is FedExed to Boston. And so it's being analyzed. We don't have the results, but as I said, if it turns out that kids can learn to read, that they don't plateau, that they aren't what's called hyperlexic, namely just translating the character string to audio without understanding a word. I know many people who say, oh, my 3-year-old reads. Rubbish. Your 3-year-old has memorized the pages. That's not reading. And you don't want that. You don't want hyperlexic reading. But if these kids can learn how to read, and we'll know it by this year, next year, this time. If they can, that's transformational. Because the mathematics work out that it costs 50 cents per week per child to do this, including the cost of the laptop, the maintenance, the servicing, the spare parts, 50 cents per week. This is absolutely manageable. And you could, in fact, roll out millions of them within less than a year. So this is really doable. And it's a very, very different approach. And thank you for the time to show it to you. I introduced Matt Keller when you weren't in the room, but he's standing in the back. And if he's the tablet person and Rodrigo's the laptop person, and they will be with you for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.